Yes, ma'am. I don't have anything.
Oh, no?
Yeah. Test, test. You guys all hear me? Who is martial arts for? Martial arts is not for the strong, because those that are strong tend to be good at everything. Whether it be football or dance, the strong and talented excel. No, martial arts is not for the strong. Martial arts is for the weak, or rather, those whose society has deemed as weak and vulnerable, because martial arts can help the weak become strong. I learned this the first time when I started my martial arts career here as an undergrad at UCLA. And that experience taught me about humility, about balance, and it gave me a community in which to belong. After I graduated, I began working as a developmental interventionist for kids with autism spectrum disorder and other developmental disabilities. And my job was to help families come together. I provided play-based therapy for kids with autism spectrum disorder and other developmental disabilities. And I trained parents in how to engage with their children. And from that point on, my mission has been to find different ways to bring children with autism closer to the social world that surrounds them. I've spent the last 6.5, actually 7 years of my life in grad school at UC Irvine, pursuing my Ph.D. in psychology and social behavior. And my most recent research has brought together the intersection of two of my life's passions, which are martial arts and helping children with autism lead happier and healthier lives. Now, for those who don't know much about autism, it's characterized by social challenges such as verbal and nonverbal communication challenges, as well as what are called restricted and repetitive behaviors. And those make it difficult to focus on other things. And this rigidity leads to trouble with what's called cognitive flexibility, which in other words is thinking and doing things that are outside of the box. Bruce Lee once said, "You must be shapeless, formless, like water." In other words, the very nature of training martial art encourages us to think outside of the box, to use what is useful and to discard what is not. To be like water is to be fluid, to be accommodating and to adapt to our circumstances. And given the challenges that kids with autism tend to face with this rigidity and the distress that's faced with breaking the mold, it seemed likely that having kids with autism train martial arts could be a good way to target these challenges. And so usually when we think about martial arts, one of the first things we think about is discipline. But what exactly does discipline mean? Discipline is the ability to regulate and control our behaviors, our thoughts, and our emotions, even in situations where doing so might be difficult. And for many children on the spectrum, discipline is often difficult. And so we set on to develop a martial art intervention to help children with autism essentially become more disciplined, to gain better cognitive control, and to have better cognitive flexibility. So in my research study, we recruited a sample of children with autism, and half began a mixed martial art intervention, and the other half was placed on a waitlist control group. The kids in the MMA group then began an MMA intervention that was specifically designed to improve these areas that are most compromised in kids with autism. And there were two key components that made it especially effective. The first was that the curriculum got more and more difficult over time, and past research by Adele Diamond and other executive functioning researchers have found that this cognitive complexity getting more and more difficult over time challenges the brain. So in our program, we had our kids start off with learning 1 to 2 step combinations, and then this became 3 to 4 steps and 4 to 5 steps. And by the end of the intervention, we had our kids engaging in not only these step sequences, we had them learning defenses, we had them learning basic grappling, and they were able to act and react with the partner in these dynamic, multi-step back and forth interactions. The second key component was the inclusion of typically developing kids known as peer buddies. And these were our kids that were students in our other kids' classes. And they volunteered their time as peer mentors in the class. Their job was not only to demonstrate the different martial arts moves, but they were also modeling the different behaviors for being in class. So paying attention, saying yes sir, bowing on the mat, and so on. And past research has actually shown that when children with autism learn skills from other kids, those skills are more likely to be generalized to other contexts relative to when they learn those same skills from an adult. And so peer buddies were also an important component of this study. So at the end of the intervention, we brought all the kids back to the lab, and this was a pre-post test design. And at the end of the intervention, we found that the kids in the martial arts group not only showed improvements compared to their pre-test baseline scores, but their scores after getting the intervention were actually much higher than the kids in our control group. And so the results confirmed for us what many martial artists already know to be true, that training martial art is a cognitive activity, that doing so challenges the brain, and it allows the brain the opportunity to practice cognitive flexibility and to gain better control of our cognition and of our emotion. So considering these findings, there are important implications not only for the overall well-being of children with autism, but well-being beyond just these cognitive skills. It gives our kids life skills. Each and every one of our kiddos has embarked on his or her own martial arts journey, and I saw the ways in which they not only improved in their martial arts training, but they made strides in their personal growth as well. I had one parent report to me that her son was being physically bullied by another child at school. And unfortunately, our kids tend to be targeted by bullies because bullies seek out the vulnerable. And he would come home with bite marks and scratches and bruises. And after training martial arts in our program for a couple months, our kid was bullied again by the same bully. And this time, though, he was actually able to defend himself. And all that he did was block and punch the other kid back once. And the bully was stunned. And you know I wouldn't condone violence, right? But the mere act of defending himself was enough for this bully to finally leave him alone. He never bothered him again after that. And that's what martial arts does for us. It gives us strength to stand up for ourselves. And it gives us a voice that we didn't have before. One of our other kids started off with a lot of social anxiety, and that's pretty common in some people with autism. And he was actually pretty comfortable interacting with adults that he knew, but he couldn't interact with other kids. It was extremely difficult for him. On day one, we couldn't even get him into the building. On day two, we actually got him into the building, but he only watched the others from afar. And little by little, day by day, we inched him closer and closer to actually participating in class. He started off by sitting on like the bench, and then we got him sitting next to the mat, and then we got him sitting on the mat, and then standing on the mat, and eventually at some point we actually got him participating in class. A few months later, our group actually got invited to do a martial arts demonstration at the Autism Speaks Walk at Angel Stadium in Anaheim. And this kid who, on day one, had so much social anxiety that he couldn't even enter the building, got up on stage and demonstrated his martial arts technique in front of an audience of hundreds. with his entire extended family there in the first row cheering him on. And to those who don't know him, it might seem like it's no big deal, right? But to those of us who recognize how far he's come and how difficult this was for him, we realize that this was a true act of strength and courage. And finally, I never expected this program to affect the peer buddies, who were the typically developing kids that were volunteering in the class. Typically developing kids, in general, don't really have a lot of exposure to kids with disabilities like autism. And as a result, many people, adults included, don't really know how to interact with someone with autism. Yeah, what I saw here on the mat was what one of my peer buddies called a miracle. I saw these arrogant, high-ranking kids become really humbled when asked to teach someone with autism because they realized that a jab is not a jab until you can explain what that jab is step by step. So teaching someone else gives us the opportunity to humble ourselves. I had another one of the peers admit to me that he held some negative stereotypes about autism. He thought that people with autism were violent, that were out of control. And after his involvement in the program, different perspectives were taken and stereotypes were debunked and attitudes changed. Among my peer buddies, I saw genuine friendships develop over a mutual love of martial arts. And there was this ripple effect of what started off as a program for kids with autism became a training tool for teaching sensitivity to our typical kids. And my hope now is that now these kids will go forth a little bit more tolerant, a little bit more humble, and they'll go out to their schools and to their communities, and they'll be the leaders and the defenders of those kids who might be a little bit different than what we're used to. You know, when I first proposed the idea of a class for kids with autism, someone actually said to me, "You don't actually expect these kids to learn real martial arts." And I remember thinking and telling them, of course we do. As martial artists, we believe completely in the potential of our students. We started off this program because we wanted to teach kids on the spectrum how to defend themselves. These are the people who need martial arts the most. But what we ended up with became so much more than that. We got this beautiful group of amazingly talented and strong kids who belonged to this inclusive place where it didn't matter what diagnosis that you've been labeled, and it didn't matter what limitations that others have told you that you had. You were accepted and you were welcomed. Imagine a world off the mat where we treated one another in this way, where we treated people who were maybe a little bit different than what we're used to, like they were our teammates. And truly then, can we find the capacity to grow stronger each day together, to learn to think outside of the box, and to be like water. Thank you.
All right.